The landing at Cape Helles was part of the amphibious invasion of the Gallipoli Peninsula by British and French forces on 25 April 1915 during the First World War. Helles, at the foot of the peninsula, was the main landing area, with the support of the guns of the Royal Navy. The 29th Division was to advance 6 miles along the peninsula on the first day and seize the heights of Athi Baba. The British were then to go on to capture the forts that guarded the Straits of the Dardanelles. A feigned landing at Bulair by the Royal Naval Division and a real landing at Anzac Cove were made to the north at Garbatipa by the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps before dawn, and a diversionary landing was made by French forces at Cumcail on the Asiatic shore of the Straits. After dark, another demonstration was made by the French in Beshika Bay. The Helles landing was mismanaged by the British commander, Major General Aylmer Hunter Weston. V&W beaches became bloodbaths, despite the meagre defences, while the landings at other sites were not exploited. Although the British managed to gain a foothold ashore, their plans were in disarray. For 2 months the British fought several costly battles to reach the first-day objectives but were defeated by the Ottoman army. Background: Ottoman belligerence. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was the sick man of Europe, weakened by political instability, military defeat and civil strife following a century of decline. Power had been seized in 1908 by a group of young officers, known as the Young Turks, who installed Mehmed V as a figurehead sultan. An enthusiastic supporter, Germany provided significant investment. German diplomats subsequently found increasing influence, despite Britain previously being the predominant power in the region, while German officers assisted in training and re-equipping the army. Despite this support, the economic resources of the empire were depleted by the cost of the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913, and the French, British and Germans had offered financial aid. A pro-German faction influenced by Enver Pasha, the former Ottoman military attaché in Berlin, opposed the pro-British majority in the Ottoman cabinet and tried to secure closer relations with Germany. In December 1913, the Germans sent a military mission to Constantinople, headed by General Otto Liman von Sanders. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire's geographic position meant that its neutrality in the event of war in Europe was of significant interest to Russia, France and Britain. During the Sarajevo crisis in 1914, German diplomats offered an anti-Russian alliance and territorial gains in Caucasia, northwest Iran and Transcaspia. The pro-British faction in the cabinet was isolated, due to the British ambassador taking leave until the 18th of August. As the crisis deepened in Europe, Ottoman policy was to obtain a guarantee of territorial integrity and potential advantages, unaware that the British might enter a European war. On 30 July 1914, 2 days after the outbreak of the war in Europe, the Ottoman leaders agreed to form a secret alliance with Germany against Russia, although it did not require them to undertake military action. On 2 August, the British requisitioned 2 modern battleships, Sultan Osman I Evel and Resadia, which were being built for the Ottoman Navy in British shipyards, for their own use, alienating supporters of the British in Constantinople, despite the offer of compensation if they remained neutral. This action strained diplomatic relations between the two empires, and the German government offered 2 cruisers, SMS Goeben and SMS Breslau, to the Ottoman Navy as replacements, in an attempt to gain influence. The Allies tried to intercept the ships, which escaped when the Ottoman government opened the Dardanelles to allow them to sail to Constantinople, despite being required under international law, as a neutral party, to block military shipping. By allowing the German ships to enter the Dardanelles, the Ottomans confirmed their links to Germany. In September, the British naval mission to the Ottomans, which had been established in 1912 under Admiral Arthur Limpus, was recalled due to increasing concern they would soon enter the war, and command of the Ottoman Navy was taken over by Rear Admiral Wilhelm Souchon, of the Imperial German Navy. Acting without orders from the Ottoman government, on the 27th of September the German commander of the Dardanelles fortifications ordered the passage closed, adding to the impression that the Ottomans were pro-German. The German naval presence and the successor German armies gave the pro-German faction in the Ottoman government enough influence to declare war on Russia. On the 27th of October, Gobin and Breslau, having been renamed Yavuz Sultan Selim and Midilli, sortied into the Black Sea, bombarded the port of Odessa and sank several Russian ships. The Ottomans refused an Allied demand to expel the German missions, and on the 31st of October 1914, formally entered the war on the side of the Central Powers. Russia declared war on Turkey on the 2nd of November. The next day, the British ambassador left Constantinople and a British naval squadron off the Dardanelles bombarded the outer defensive forts at Kumkaylan, Sedolbahir. A shell hit a magazine, knocked the guns off their mounts and killed 86 soldiers. Britain and France declared war on the 5th of November, and the Ottomans declared a jihad later that month, launching an offensive in the Caucasus against the Russians, to regain former Turkish provinces. Fighting also began in Mesopotamia, following a British landing to occupy the oil facilities in the Persian Gulf. The Ottomans prepared to attack Egypt in early 1915, to occupy the Suez Canal and cut the Mediterranean route to India and the Far East. Allied strategy in the Dardanelles. By late 1914, the race to the sea in France, a war of maneuver, had ended and trench lines had been dug from the Swiss border to the English Channel. The German Empire and Austria-Hungary closed the overland trade routes between Britain and France in the west and Russia in the east. The White Sea in the Arctic and the Sea of Okhotsk in the Far East were icebound in winter and distant from the Eastern Front. The Baltic Sea was blockaded by the Kaiserliche Marine, and the entrance to the Black Sea through the Dardanelles was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. While the empire remained neutral, trade with Russia continued, but the straits were closed before the Ottomans went to war, and in November mine-laying was begun in the waterway. Aristide Briand made a proposal in November to attack the Ottoman Empire, which was rejected, and an attempt by the British to pay the Ottomans to join the Allied side also failed. Later that month, Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty, proposed a naval attack on the Dardanelles, based in part on erroneous reports of Ottoman troop strength. Churchill wanted to use a large number of obsolete battleships, which could not operate against the German High Seas Fleet, for an operation against the Dardanelles, with a small occupation force provided by the army. It was hoped that an attack on the Ottomans would also draw the former Ottoman territories of Bulgaria and Greece into the war, on the Allied side. On the 2nd of January 1915, Grand Duke Nicholas of Russia appealed to Britain for assistance against the Ottomans, who were conducting an offensive in the Caucasus. Planning began for a naval demonstration in the Dardanelles to divert troops from the Caucasian theater. Prelude: Ottoman defensive preparations. The naval operations in the Dardanelles ended with the failure on the 18th of March to push a naval force through the straits, during which 3 battleships were sunk and 4 capital ships were severely damaged by naval mines laid along the Asiatic shore. Preparations began for a landing to help the Navy neutralize the forts and batteries guarding the straits, but the preparations in Egypt were not concealed. The French commander even spoke of it in an interview with an Alexandria newspaper. On the 24th of March, Enver Pasha, the Ottoman Minister of War, unified the military forces around the Dardanelles, under the command of Marshal Otto Liman von Sanders and the Fifth Army headquarters. On arrival at Gallipoli, Liman ordered that the garrisons in the peninsula be concentrated and the 5th and 7th Divisions were moved to Bulair. The 9th Division was deployed in the southern part of the peninsula, from Suvla Bay to Sed El Bahr, and the 11th Division garrisoned the Asiatic shore, near Bogali. The 19th Division was stationed as a reserve, under the command of the 5th Army Headquarters, ready to move to Bulair, Garbatipa or the Asiatic side according to developments. Liman emphasized a policy of mobile defense by the divisions in the three defensive areas, rather than persist with the attempt to guard the coasts with continuous defenses, and the redeployment was carried out by night, to evade scrutiny by Allied reconnaissance aircraft. The 9th Division under Colonel Halil Sami Bey deployed its forces according to the new defense scheme, creating a northern zone from the mouth of Ilder, north of Ari Bernu to Semeli Tepe, occupied by the 27th Regiment and some mountain artillery, and a southern zone from Semeli Tepe to Sed El Bahr, garrisoned by the 26th Regiment. The 25th Regiment was placed in reserve on the Kilad Bar Plateau near Seraphim Farm, able to intervene in either zone. In the northern defense zone, the 27th Regiment commander Lieutenant Colonel Ali Chefik Bey put the 2nd Battalion on the coast, with two 120mm guns at Garbatipa and two 150mm guns further inland. The 1st and 3rd Battalions were held in reserve near Midos of Garbatipa. In the southern defense zone, Lieutenant Colonel Qadri Bey, the 26th Regiment commander, created 3 battalion areas. A northern or Kumtepa sector, from Semeli Tepe to Sari Tepe, occupied by the 1st Battalion, with 3 companies supported by a field battery on the coast and a company in reserve, with two 150mm guns south of Garbatipa. In the central, Krithia sector, the 2nd Battalion covered the area from Sari Tepe to the mouth of Gully Ravine and from Sed El Bahr to the mouth of Tenkirda. 1 company was placed on the Aegean coast and 1 near Mortar Bay. The other 2 were put in reserve at Canlida, southeast of Krithia at the regimental headquarters. On the west bank of Karibsda, a battery of 105mm howitzers commanded the straits. The southern, Sed El Bahr sector, ran from Gully Beach to Sed El Bahr and was garrisoned by the 3rd Battalion and a company of engineers which were working on the beach defences. 1 company guarded W Beach. A company was placed at Sed El Bahr with 4 Maxim guns on high ground overlooking V Beach, and 2 companies were in reserve on low ground, northwest of Mortar Bay. 12 men watched X Beach. At the 3 beaches where the British were to make large landings, there were 2 infantry companies and 4 to 6 machine guns, with 2 infantry and 1 engineer company in reserve. On the Asiatic shore, the 3rd Division had 2 regiments near Troy and 1 from Kumkale to Yenisher. The 11th Division lay in reserve near Izine, with detachments on either side of Bashika Bay. Allied plan. The purpose of the military operation was to assist the fleet to force the straits, by taking from the rear the Ottoman forts on the European side of the Narrows, and to obtain a vantage point, from which the forts on the Asiatic side could be dominated. The objective was the Kilit Baha Plateau, which covered the Ottoman forts in the Narrows and which ran in a semicircle most of the width of the peninsula, between Midos and Soenlida. The plateau ran from Kilit Baha westwards for about 4 miles, was about 2 miles wide at its broadest point and 600 to 800 feet high. The Ottomans had entrenched and wired the plateau and extended the fortifications south to Kakmada Ridge on the straits and north to Garbatipa, forming a defensive line where the peninsula was 5 miles wide and which dominated the Kilia Plain to the southwest. General Sir Ian Hamilton, commander of the MEF, chose to make 2 landings with 2 diversions. The Anzac Corps would make a surprise landing between Garbatipa and Fisherman's Hut, with the covering force landing just before dawn, with no preliminary bombardment. After consolidating the left flank, the force was to advance eastwards towards Midos to cut Ottoman communications with the garrisons further south. on the Gallipoli Peninsula on either side of Cape Helles, where the Navy could provide support from three sides. A covering force of the 86th Brigade and additional units would land and secure the beaches. Then the main force would follow up and advance to the first-day objectives, the village of Krithia and the hill of Athi Baba. 5 beaches were selected for the landing, from east to west: S, V, W, X and Y beaches. V and W beaches were the main landings at the tip of the peninsula, either side of Cape Helles. To the north of the Anzac landings, a diversion was to be mounted at Bulair. The Royal Naval Division, less 2 battalions, was to make a demonstration at the narrowest point of the peninsula, to induce the Ottomans to retain forces in the area during the main landings. A naval covering force would bombard the Bulair defences all day, and one ship would make a close reconnaissance, with the transports visible in the background. To the south of the landings around Cape Helles, on the Asiatic shore at Cumcale, a French regiment of the Corps Expeditionnaire d'Orient would land temporarily at the same time as the 29th Division at Cape Helles, to distract Ottoman artillery on the Asiatic shore, confuse the Ottoman command and delay the dispatch of reinforcements from the Asia to Gallipoli, before withdrawing to join the main landings on the peninsula. Despite the assurance of a 1905 Admiralty report that water was plentiful in the valleys, extensive preparations were made to maintain an adequate water supply. In April, the Indian 9th Mule Corps arrived from France with 4,316 mules and 2,000 carts, and in Egypt his Iron Mule Corps was formed from Jewish-Russian émigrés from Palestine. The need for means to carry water was considered so urgent that in mid-April, a request was forwarded to Egypt for the Iron Mule Corps to be sent immediately, regardless of its lack of equipment.